I'm Charlie Cook, and I taught at Somerville High School from 1969 to 2003.
We graduated in '68, so you came the year after.
Oh, that class of '68, you guys in the class of '68, you are so loyal to this place. I'm very excited for you because you're going to have 50 people at the reunion at Class Day. That's wonderful. The medallion here at the front of the auditorium had been covered up since 1972, and fortunately the roof blew off in a storm and the whole auditorium had to be redone. So that's been here for a long, long time. But it had been covered up for all those years. I remember when I graduated in '63, I remember that medallion very well. But it's been gone for a long time.
Now the auditorium is not going to be, this is not going to be an auditorium when they redo the building. And they are hoping to be able to save the medallion, to save some of the structures in the front. But a lot of it is built with terracotta materials, and they are really afraid that once they start to take down this and some of the things that make Somerville High distinctive at the very front of the building, that they will crumble. They're going to try, and let's hope they do, because it makes it so distinctive. And it's what reminds you of when you walk through the doors.
Now, how many of you remember the auditorium?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, because it used to go back that way a good deal more, right? And so things have changed a good deal, even in the space now. These are classrooms, by the way, right here, behind those walls. So, different world, a little bit. Let's take a walk. We're going to go all the way up to the 4th floor, but I promise I won't make you climb any more stairs. Wow. So these used to be science classrooms, but now they're labs. Remember the pigeons? The English office used to face out onto that area. And literally, if you opened a window, 3 or 4 pigeons would come in and join you. And all the books were there. That's right. And we'd have to climb over what had been returned, and it was kind of fun. Among other things, those of you who were in the Glee Club, remember that? Those rooms are now with the that's right, with the auditorium seating. That is gone. That is not here anymore. They're all science rooms. Well, I mean, everything changes, right? Okay, so let's take a look. Let's go down the West Wing first. Things I most love about this school are the views out of the windows.
Especially up here.
There were so many classes that I would just space out in, and at least there was something to look at. And whether you're on the south side of the building or the north side of the building, the views are amazing. The only fear I have, and it's a recurrent dream that I have, is that I'm retired, I'm in my 80s, and the room that was my classroom for a lot of years is now the room that I reside in forever. And I have that dream about once or twice a year. And the view is not so bad, but just the idea of 34 more years in that room doesn't do it for me. Well, let's take a walk down here, because you're going to see some things that have really changed. This was one of my first classrooms, and the first couple of years I taught here, I was a wanderer. I went from room to room and was totally exhausted. Now, those of you, how many remember what was here?
The superintendent's office.
Well, the superintendent's office is downstairs, but there was a building master's office here, and it was all glassed in. It was all glassed in, and it was beautiful. It was all the oak woodwork and all of that stuff, and they stripped all of that out when they did the 1985 change. So let's go in a classroom just to see. So does anybody have a story about this place? Your homeroom. And what do you remember about it?
I remember Miss Rooney.
Miss Rooney. Ah, yes, Miss Rooney. Tell me about Miss Rooney.
I used good teacher.
Yeah. Yeah.
Teat.
Yeah. Her father used to be the head of the English department many years before.
His brother, Ed Rooney, taught math.
Right.
That's right.
Mr. Rooney used to wear bow ties.
He used to eat chalk.
Used to sit in the front of the classroom and just sit there.
Yes,
And
yeah,
he
remember.
would drop. Thinking about what he was doing on the board, and then it, right?
No,
he
seriously,
did,
yeah.
right? And then he'd sit there and he'd
Does
nibble on the end of the drop.
anybody here have Mr. Lagambino? Yes. Science? Okay, Mr. Lagambino is now the headmaster of Somerville High School, and in a real tip of the hat to what makes Somerville such a rich place on so many levels, I had Mr. Lagambino in the 7th grade and the 9th grade. He was a teacher here for many years. He was a science department head. He was a vice principal, and now he's the headmaster. So that kind of continuity is rare these days, and becoming rarer even in Somerville High School. But what makes Somerville different than other cities and towns is that there's a real connection to the school system.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think one of the things I loved was that we knew our students and we knew where they were from.
Right.
We had lived in that area, we had been part of it, we played ball in the same ball fields, and it was a different kind of world because students felt they could come to us and talk. There was always one teacher at least who you could come and talk to.
Mr.
Now,
Barrow.
Mr.
Barra.
was in England, was he a department head?
He was department head.
When I think I started to work.
Yeah, Mr. Barra, when I had him as an English teacher.
Yes, so did
So
I
let's
did
talk
for 2
about
years.
Mr. Barra.
I loved him.
Mr. Barra was one very wise man, and
Like with the chalk.
oh yes, yes. There was a
You
whole
have a
performance.
great memory.
Mr. Thornton, do you remember having studies in the back of the classroom?
I had a study with Dr. Burns.
Oh,
At least
sorry.
Legendary.
we know that you studied, okay? But Mr. Barra, I have to give him credit with actually giving me the desire to become an English major in college, because he was a fascinating man. Graduated from Harvard, maybe the brightest person I ever knew.
Always in a black suit.
He could just drag the creativity right out of you.
Exactly. And I never had him as a teacher, but for 1/2 of the school year, I had him sitting in the back of the room as a study student, and I never got any
'Cause you
work
listened to him so
done
much.
because he was fascinating.
Yeah.
Very old school, dignified,
He had, well,
classical.
sometimes not. He had nicknames for all of us in the class.
Oh,
Everybody
yes.
had a nickname.
Yep.
All right, let's.
I had Mr.
Yeah.
Quinlan.
Mr.
Oh, I
Quinlan.
was Quinlan.
Yes.
Okay, Miss Brignani.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see. What
And then Mr. Leonard also.
Oh,
Mr.
Mr.
Leonard,
Leonard's still
Jim
a
Leonard.
friend.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mr.
still a
Lugoff.
friend.
He was
Mr.
boy.
Lugoff, I
You
remember
were lucky
Mr.
if you got
Lugoff
Mr.
used
Leonard.
to love doing
Used to
a
do tail-
streetcar
Streetcar
named
named
Desire.
Desire. He was Blanche. He was Blanche,
He used to
yeah.
bring up all the fights in the cafeteria.
Mr. Walzak?
Mr. Vignani?
He taught science, Mr.
Yes,
Walzak,
yes.
and then I think computer
Yeah.
technology.
Yeah, he was my homeroom teacher.
Miss Skinner?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Kathy Skinner?
Yeah.
Was it Susan Vignani?
Yes,
She
Susan
graduated with
Brignani.
us.
Yeah, she's
Oh,
one of
really?
the-
She
Okay,
sat
I'm
near me.
very good friends with her sister Elaine and
Elaine,
Michael,
yeah.
who
Yeah.
taught art here for many
Yeah,
years.
yeah.
And actually, the cousin Bob,
Yeah.
and Stanley
Oh,
are the
Stan-
cousins.
Stan I
Yeah.
still
And
see
Bobby
from time
lives
to
in
time.
Wyoming. Hopefully,
Wow.
he'll be back.
How about
for a
Rosemary
reunion.
Ruby?
I remember her.
Yeah.
Was that Miss Maisel?
Miss Maisel.
Maisel, that's right.
Rosemary Watson.
Yes.
Rosemary Watson.
Yes.
See, she's of a time, and I'm
Of
going
a
to go
different
back
time.
even further.
I know.
Uh,
I know.
Miss-
no,
do
it's
any
not.
of you remember
Moshe?
Miss
Did anybody
McPherson?
hear Mr. Moshe for
Yeah, most
Yeah,
I
I
had
had
Yeah.
Miss McPherson.
Yeah.
I got one you don't know.
Miss McPherson?
Miss McPherson.
No.
I know Miss. She used to live
remember
on the
the name.
corner of Renford Street and School.
Absolutely. And she was, I don't know how old she was.
127.
Yeah, at least. But one of the nicest people the world has ever made. If you remember, this whole area was English rooms, and as a matter of fact, during the construction in 84, 83, this was my classroom. And I haven't been back here in a while. And I walked out and I realized this used to be one of those little small offices. And come on in. During the construction, there was a crane outside of my classroom. And my students would watch everything that was going on because the crane was lifting things and it had a metal ball on it. And I'm not going to tell you the rest of the story, although you can look it up in the Somerville Journal, I'm sure. And we had windows that were spring-loaded. And you could lift them up, but you're smiling, so you know this. You could lift them up, And if you were lucky, it would stay up and not cut your hand off as the time you were, yeah.
Usually, you had to open them with a pole.
Oh, those were different ones. These were windows they put in. I think they got them at a cut rate, but they had springs in them that didn't work. And so forever during the summertime, I would take books and stack them. But that crane out the back here kept my students fascinated, much more fascinated about the crane than anything I could ever teach them. Although I do get messages back every once in a while from a student who actually, one of my students actually said, remember when you told us not to slice the bologna quite so thin? And I said, you remember that? And she's 66 years old now, so I must have made an impression of some sort. Well, let's take a walk. Notice, by the way, that the teaching equipment in the schools is much better. Remember the chalkboards?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there were chalkboards all the way along here. Now people have smart boards. And I never had an opportunity to use this until I started teaching in college, but it's one of the best things for teachers and kids that there ever could be. Wow. Great teaching tool. Let's go. For those of you who remember the music room,
Oh, yes.
yeah, this was the back entrance to the music room. Okay? Mr. Torello's room now. Mr. Torello.
Joe T.
Mr. Torello is old as Tutankhamun,
Yep.
and has been teaching just that well for as many years. One of my favorite people in this whole building.
We called him Joe T.
Joe T.
Oh, no.
Now, do you remember there was another room that had stadium seating?
That was where Joe
science.
Pignatello used to teach his
That's right.
planetary or whatever.
That's right. Now, these are still all old science rooms. They're still used for the same purpose. I don't think that has the, no it doesn't. Doesn't have the staging in there. We are approaching Dr. Beaudrin's classroom.
Oh my God, she's
I know.
still here?
No. But nice try. It's just
We would
that
have felt your presence.
there are some people who still remember her, I think. I came to this classroom for 2 classes, both physiology and biology, with Dr. Beaudrin, and this was her room.
God, the tears.
Come on now, it's okay. It's okay.
I had Mr. Roble for physics.
Mr. Roble, I remember Mr. Roble very
He
well.
was my physics teacher.
Yes, and a nice man.
Yes, very
I think
nice.
he retired mid-80s, I think.
Probably.
Yeah.
He was,
Yeah,
Yeah.
because he was here when I first started.
Yep,
In '82.
That's right.
A couple of years.
He was a good physics teacher.
that's right. And
You know, it's funny, if you start at that age, how things are different. That senior staff seems so old, quote unquote.
oh yeah.
They are far younger than I am now, but they seem like such
They
a
seemed
younger
when he was
generation.
teaching me.
Well,
He seemed old.
I think that was one of the fun things about it was that we were the generation. When I started teaching in Somerville, 95 new teachers came into the city in the same group, so that the change.
What year, please?
69.
And those were turbulent
How
years
about- yeah.
politically in general.
Say again?
It was reflected in the high school too.
Sounds good.
Please do.
But that was an interesting time because it changed a lot of things.
Yeah.
At one time, this was Mr. Buckley's room. I'm not sure you're old enough to remember Mr. Buckley. Then there was,
Buckley. Yeah.
you remember him?
Yes, I do.
Okay, that was his room. This was Louis de Gaulle's room.
Yeah.
And a lot of the social studies teachers were up in this wing.
Okay, yeah.
I don't remember my sophomore teacher.
You don't?
No.
Okay,
Yeah,
that happens.
Buckley,
I don't remember anything, to be honest with you.
I always try to remember what it was that happened in that place. Mr. de Gaulle was an interesting guy. When I was a student here, Mr. de Gaulle was the scourge of the history department.
Wow.
And he taught U.S. history. And to be honest with you, I didn't like him.
Who was this?
Mr. de Gaulle.
Oh, Louis de Gaulle.
Louis de Gaulle, yeah.
I had Mr. Murray, I was lucky.
Mr. Murray, yeah.
Okay, I got to tell you the whole story though. Mr. de Gaulle was my U.S. history teacher. And every time I raised my hand in class, I knew it was going to be a trial, but I couldn't resist. And Mr. DeGoli would torture me. He would ask me one question, then another question, until I was just totally frazzled. And I would go home that night and just get so angry at the man. And then I came here and taught. And he so intimidated me that he was always Mr. DeGoli to me.
Yeah.
Lou DeGoli.
Intimidating?
Oh, for me he was, because I had him in class.
At the beginning of my time, he was already at the end of his career and
Yeah.
probably had mellowed quite
Well,
a bit.
I'm going to finish out the story because it's a very interesting story. As intimidated as I was by him, we did sort of have a sort of a neutral, a kind of a truce. But what happened was that in 1988, I went to law school, and Louis was a lawyer.
I didn't know that.
Oh yes, Louis was a lawyer, and when I graduated and passed the bar, he sent me a card, and in that card it said, "I always knew you could do it."
Huh.
Too bad he didn't share that with you.
Well,
but
that's
you
why
could
he
have
pushed
used
him. No, so now you know he was pushing you.
It was just his way of teaching.
Yeah.
And
Teaching
sometimes you have to accept the fact that you may not like your teachers, but they're doing a lot of what's best for you. So let's take a walk. We're going down to the second floor, which is the third floor now. I know you're all confused by that. But we'll go down there and take a look. In the east wing, that was the down stairway, this was the up stairway.
Yeah.
In the west wing,
like a
it was
map.
reversed.
Well, 2 minutes to do it.
That's right. So
It
you had
produced-
to plan which were the
Yeah.
crowded staircases and which were the less crowded
Forget about
staircases.
asking a question at the end of class because you knew you weren't going to make it to your
Right.
next
was
question.
very, very strict.
I need to ask you a question. Ian, can I have a read through?
Come on, guys.
One time I took the
Now, one of the fun things about this, these are just classrooms, but if you have a classroom that you remember and you want to kind of visit, sit in the seat, something. How many of you had desks that were wooden desks that were screwed to the floor?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Me too. Me too.
When did that change? I remember that.
I don't entirely
I mean, I
remember.
remember that from my own high school, but not.
Yeah, I don't entirely remember. I think it may have been the '83 construction where they moved in new furniture. This was all a beautiful office with all fancy woodwork.
Husky's office.
Mr. McCuster's
This
office.
is my senior homeroom take home.
Right, right.
The library was my gym,
Oh, so it was
so I never saw
Right.
anything to do.
We're gonna go take a look at the library, just to give you some sense of what's down there. How many of you remember where your sophomore homeroom was?
10 in the basement.
10 in the basement. How many of you remember where your junior homeroom was?
332.
Mine was around the
I can't
corner.
believe the memories you have.
And then we just went to my senior.
My senior home was right
Yeah? So homeroom was important, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That was a big time. What happened in homeroom? Attendance, yeah, that was the big thing. But there was also stuff that went on in the classroom that the teacher knew nothing about, right?
Oh, in the
In homeroom.
homeroom.
Oh yeah, because homeroom was a fairly long time in those days, right? What was it, about 15 minutes or so? Maybe even
like that.
20?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was a whole social
At the
environment.
end of the day, too, you came
Right.
back to homeroom.
Yeah, you go back, right?
Yeah.
Because that's where your lockers
Yeah,
were.
and you really got close to your homeroom teacher, even if you
Yeah.
didn't have him or her for a subject class.
For my senior year, Mr. Gwalzak always turned on 106.7 Magic. In the Civil War.
Senior privilege.
I want nothing to do with that story. Let's take a walk downstairs. Let's go this way.
with the new gym beside the library. Now the old.
What we have is the old high school, the old English high school, and notice that it had a peaked roof that was taken off, I think after the fire in 50, was that 50?
Oh, I don't know.
55, yeah. Right. And that's the way the campus, exactly. That's the way, that's, why don't you tell them the story, because you know this.
I don't know, this is a different era for me. I'm having a cultural shock today. Just by the way you're talking, it's entirely different
Yeah.
What do you mean?
from my era.
Oh, of course, and that's part of the reason why we're doing this.
I know it.
Because this building has a history.
Yeah.
And I think that if you don't understand the history, I'm 50s and 60s here. How many of you remember this is the health room?
Yeah, I remember.
Health room, not anymore, it's mediation. Health room's gone to another spot.
Like when the kids are in trouble?
The mediation program is a well-known mediation program. And what they try to do is to calm problems down. If you remember the 80s and even the 70s, we would have conflicts here among students, serious ones. And what they've tried to do with the mediation department is to kind of make that, to kind of lower the tension. Yeah. And they negotiate agreements between people, and it's been very successful.
Student mediators?
The students do it.
The students do it. The students do it. It's led by.
Training.
They get certified?
They take
Yes.
a training
Yeah.
course
Yeah.
led by adults.
Yeah.
And so they learn how to get the two parties to listen to each other, to see things from each other's point of view. And for the most part, those things get
They
squashed.
get solved, and
They get
it's so much
squashed.
better.
Yeah.
Some of you remember this as the outdoor classroom, but there are older people here who remember it as a jungle and yes, and also a smoking area. So, and I was here during the period where they allowed students to smoke at
Really?
Oh yes. The idea was that we were going to let them go outside and smoke, and they wouldn't do it the rest of the time in the school. Didn't quite work that way, but it was a good idea. Those of you who remember that, and you also remember probably down the back there was a smoking area where you could, outside the cafeteria, right. What do you think? Early 1900s, huh?
Yeah, usually.
Early 1900s. And those are the same desks, sorry, that those of us remember when we talk about the desks that were screwed down.
I had those in my own.
And they have the inkwell in it,
That's right.
Oh, yes.
That's
In the
right.
upper right
That's
corner.
right.
That's right. How many of you actually used a straight ink pen?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Remember that?
I remember it blotting because the paper
Oh, all the
was
time.
like
Oh, you
recycled.
got
All
them
the
on
time.
your fingers.
But that paper had blotches.
Do you remember having to suck on the pen point so that you could get the oil off of it?
Press it down.
No, actually, that was a dislocated knee here.
Okay, folks. Now, just to let me wait until everybody gets here.
We lost everybody.
I know, but it happens. I used to I do trips every once in a while. We do trips where you're led by a travel guide,
Yeah.
and people are forever straggling behind. You remember the gym, yes. If you walk through that door, you walk directly into the gym.
Yeah.
Funny.
Now, what happened with the 1985 reconstruction of this area, the remodel, is that remember the stage in the gym?
Yeah.
The stage is over behind this wall. It was used as a music room for many years. I'm not sure what it's being used for now, but the stage is still there, at least in part.
Music room.
And it's still a music room, okay. And of course, you're going to remember this place a lot better if there were just stands up here and a lot of noise.
And our proms.
And the prom. How many of you had their prom in the high school?
Here, yeah.
Okay, me too.
You know, I heard stories about how you used to walk up Highland Ave.
Oh, yeah, it
Everybody
was like
would
the
be
red
dressed
carpet.
up, and all
Yeah,
the
people
parents
would-
would be there taking
yeah,
pictures.
people would-
The visual of that sounds
Yeah.
fantastic.
And there was a walkway up
It was a
front with
walkway,
that-
and
Yeah, and there
it
were
was your red
stairs.
carpet
Yeah.
moment.
Yes.
Yeah, there were stairs, and as the stairs began to crumble, people had a lot harder time walking up the stairs. I remember for my prom, just keeping my date balanced because the edge of the stair had worn away over the years, and it was a chore to do that.
Everybody remember who they went to the prom with?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I remember. I remember. I
Oh, I
ran
don't
it.
know if you want
want to hear that story.
She's a retired teacher now, so I do remember. Okay.
Come on in, everybody.
Now, here's the interesting thing. For all its enormity, it used to go all the way back that way, okay? And this wall, are you looking at? This used to be the gym. Do you?
Look at the ceiling.
Yeah. Do you see back the end? Isn't it a lot shorter than? Do you remember what was there?
Yeah.
There was a whole reception area.
Right, there was
Right?
Yeah.
Right. So that's not there anymore.
Big set of stairs, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And of course, oh yes, absolutely, absolutely. The classrooms here make it look smaller than it actually was.
Right.
There was a ticket office over here,
Okay, yeah.
and you would come in, get your tickets, and if you were a club or an organization that was running a function here, you would serve, there was soda and all sorts of things in that space over there.
Okay.
And I'm trying to reconstruct this as best I know how, but let me think. The fact of the matter is this place would rock at a basketball game.
Yes.
It was the coolest place to be because it was close, it was noisy, it was maybe the best place to watch a sporting event ever.
And we did the donkey basketball game. I don't know if you guys did that, student council.
Yep.
Yeah, we put on, and then the other thing is, we used to have dances here on Friday night.
Oh, absolutely, all the
And
time.
We used to have, recording stars came. Like we had, It's My Party,
Leslie Gore.
Leslie Gore was here.
Beacon
Paul-
Street Union.
Paul Peterson, my dad, now here is a man, Paul Revere and the Raiders.
In this particular community, there were a lot of disc jockeys who knew Somerville people, and very often when we had dances, we would have the name disc jockeys that were on radio currently as our disc jockeys. So this whole space's personality has changed a good deal, a good deal. So it's kind of cool.
Boys Club Telethon.
What's that?
We broadcast the Boys Club Telethon.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you remember the prom? Did they have a grand march at the end of your prom?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The king and the queen.
Yep. And students doing all the decorations? Well, would you like to go to the cafeteria?
Yes.
Okay, let's go to the caf.
Green Jello.
Come on, folks. My group has gotten larger. I can't even believe. What happened?
All right, where's the cat?
See, you remember. He's gonna remember.
It was the only toilet that had no seats. And I'm sure you were the guy who ripped the seat out. I mean, they got fancy toilets in here now, you know, with seats and everything. It's just amazing.
You the teacher?
Yes, I was.
You were my teacher.
No!
What is your name?
Charlie Cook.
Yeah. Did you want to be an astronaut?
No. But I did become a lawyer. This was the band locker room when I was a student here.
Oh my God.
All right? Which tells you what I did when I was a student here. And all it was lockers, and it was pretty messy, and the only time we ever used it was on Saturdays for a football game. But that's what that was.
The hole in the wall.
The old hole, this is the new hole in the wall. Okay.
Actually, wasn't the one on either side? Was it 1 and 2?
Well, interestingly enough, none of this stuff was even here when I was a student or a teacher here for the first several years. This was just a straight line corridor into the cafeteria that began right here. So the cafeteria is a good deal shorter than it was. After '85, the cafeteria became a good deal smaller, except that we used both sides. There used to be classrooms. Well, the teacher's caf was over here on this side, a separate room, and then there were classrooms over on the other side. So it's changed a good deal. Now, how many of you remember this cafeteria?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. This cafeteria is a good deal smaller than the original caf. And not the same place at all. However, I think maybe the tables are the same. If you were here in the 80s,
What
these may
benches
still be
we
the...
had, like a one long wooden
That's
bench.
right.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right. And you were one of the guys who never cleaned up his lunch, right? Absolutely. I remember that. Yeah. You remember those duties? There'd be teachers down here, usually the younger teachers.
Yeah.
Well, they didn't want the job, but they had no seniority, so they ended up in the cafeteria.
Yeah.
And as a result, they weren't really happy with the fact that they would have to go around reminding you to pick up your stuff before you left. And it was kind of zooey. Then they got another story, quick story. There was one custodian who solved the problem. Want to know what he solved? How he solved it? He would, at the end of lunch, get up on the table with a broom and just sweep everything to the other end.
I remember that.
You didn't have cafeteria duty a lot.
No, I never had cafeteria.
There you go. There you go. I don't know. I mean, there could be this. I'm sure that wing is open. Thank you so much, folks.
Thank you.
And it was fun. I had a good time. And I just love some of the stories you told because they're the kind of stories that really would make the high school high school.